Okay, thanks. Hi, everybody. This is Jim. I'm a manager of software consulting here at Dean Dorton, here to talk to you about Sage Intacct Release 3. Incidentally, yesterday, Starbucks released their pumpkin spice latte, the earliest they have ever released it for the fall season. So now you can enjoy your pumpkin spice latte, get your Uggs, get your scarf, and become a pro in Sage Intacct. So the things we're going to talk about today, we're going to talk about the highlights of Release 3. Some major things that happened during this release have to do with credit card feeds, dynamic allocations, journal entry automation. There's a Salesforce integration for nonprofits, big changes with the 1099 NEC form, a bunch of miscellaneous updates, and we'll try to leave time for Q&A. But as Yelena said, please feel free to just flow your questions into the Q&A as they come up, and we'll stop periodically to get to them. So some of the highlights of this release, there's really three kind of themes, and these themes have been pretty consistent across many of Sage Intacct's past releases. So one of the themes is best-in-class financials, and along that theme, we see the credit card feeds with enhancement to credit card reconciliation, the ability to feed credit card transactions in from a bank like we had with bank feeds, and more. We have cross-entity multi-currency dynamic allocations, some enhanced journal entry automation. Along the theme of deep cross-industry functionality, there's more contract lifecycle management flexibility. So those of you dealing with multiple element arrangement accounting got some nice enhancement during this release. The inventory module has released advanced bin management and some streamlined functionality in warehouse transfers. And there is a Salesforce integration for nonprofits. I'll say this now and I will say it again, it is in beta, so you're not going to see it just looking through your menu. It's something that is currently in the early adopter phase. There's also a best-in-class cloud platform theme, and along those lines, there have been some usability enhancements with multi-entity navigation and session timeouts. There have been some enhancements to the interactive custom report writer to support account groups and to support marrying data from multiple different areas in the system. And there have been enhancements in platform services. So for those of you developer types, or those of you who like to customize, there's easier ways to work with your platform apps and to work with what we call triggers. So why does Release 3 matter? Well, it changed a lot of things in your Intacct environment over the weekend. That's one reason why it matters. But other reasons that it matters are we've gotten the capability to centralize management of credit card transactions and reconciliation, enhance multi-entity and dynamic allocation functionality. Again, the pre-built Salesforce integration for nonprofits, better ability to explore data in the ICRW, interactive custom report writer, more and more automation. Every release, there's more automation, moving closer and closer to what Intacct refers to, for those of you who've been to Advantage in the past, as the intelligent general ledger, and overall just continuing to enhance the user experience. So the first major area we want to talk about is credit cards, and this is a big change that a lot of people were waiting for. So you know that not terribly long ago, Intacct released bank feeds via their connection with the Sage Banking Cloud. And the idea behind it is to help facilitate faster reconciliation and to cut down on situations where you have to import data or where you have to reconcile by looking at your bank account on one screen or a piece of paper and compare that to Intacct on another. Well, in this release, now we have bank feed functionality rolled out for credit cards. This is going to save significant time on credit card reconciliations. So you're going to be able to get your card transactions fed in from the bank. You can match those transactions to transactions in your books, create those credit card transactions, reconcile, and if you have your permission set up right, you have an approval workflow for your credit card reconciliation. Now, the reconciliation screen is also now going to look and feel exactly the same as the bank account reconciliation screen. So there's no more of that situation where you were in this kind of older looking UI when you were doing credit card rec. Now it just all looks the same. So what are some of the benefits that you're going to get out of this? Hopefully you're going to save hours reconciling and recording any high volumes of credit card feeds. You can see all your bank and your credit card transactions in a centralized view. Your accuracy is going to go up because you can automatically generate your credit card transactions. And you can create credit card transactions and journal entries and autofill some of the important details. And we're going to see a lot of this when we get to a little bit of demo in a bit. So a long-awaited feature, in addition to what we just talked about, is the ability to delete a credit card transaction. A lot of people had issues with the fact that you can't delete one. You always had to reverse, and then your list of credit card transactions could be a mile long. Well, now you can delete the transaction as long as it has not yet been included in a charge payoff, it has not been paid or partially paid, and it's not tied to any bills, meaning that you didn't go to, accounts payable, pay bills, and choose credit card as your payment method and then pay off a bill. If you did any of those, you can't delete it, but otherwise you can. So when you're looking at the list of credit card transactions, you also will have the ability to view transactions by state. So you can sort and filter and view transactions by, are these paid? Are these draft? Are these posted? There's also a new look for charge payoffs along with some new functionality. So we'll see more of this in demo, but basically Intacct has given you some great filtering options in the past, and now they've added the ability to include a reference number and description for easy context when you're looking at a charge payoff transaction. And finally, when you created a charge payoff, the button in your charge payoff screen used to say save. And some people found this confusing, understandably so, because that did not necessarily imply that you were creating a transaction that would have had a posting impact. So they've renamed the save button to post to make this clearer. So let's take a look at these credit card enhancements. I know these are exciting for a lot of people. So I'm going to hop over to my Intacct environment, move my WebEx thing out of the way. Okay, so here, first thing I want to show is I have a list here of all my different credit card accounts. And I want to show you the ability to connect a credit card to a bank feed. This works very much the same as connecting an actual bank account to a bank feed. So you see on my credit card here, I have the Banking Cloud tab. I can hit connect. And then I can find my bank. So there are commonly used banks, and then I can also type in, if my bank is not in the commonly used list, I might be able to type in a bank, something like, I guess First Niagara is not a thing in a lot of places, huh? There's a million banks called community banks, so there you go. So if I had a bank called community bank, not a common bank, not in this commonly used list, but it's here. And then if I wanted to, just for the purposes of showing you guys, I can connect this to a demo bank right now, sign my life away, and hit continue. And get a bunch of other warnings, and then eventually I'll connect. When you connect, you have to tell it how far back you want the transactions to pull in from. This is familiar for anybody who's worked with the bank feeds. Some banks, as they warn you here, are only going to allow you to pull the last 90 days of transactions. So I'll try to go from like June 1st and keep my expectations low, as I do with most things in life, and just wait for these transactions to sync over. It's going to ask you to confirm. Make sure that the name of your bank matches up with whatever you're trying to link it to, and confirm. So now that's doing all that feeding, and the transactions are coming in, and eventually when you go to your reconciliation screen, you'll see those. Now, I also mentioned you could see all of your bank and credit card transactions in a single place. So here I've got in my cash management module, bank transactions, and now I can see here's all my transactions, whether they came from a credit card or they came from, if I scroll all the way down, banks. And of course, there's all this filtering. So I could say I want to look at US Bank, and that'll trim down my list a little bit. Notice you've also got the ability here to bulk ignore transactions. So if you're like, oh, these are duplicates or something wrong with these and I don't want to work with them, you can bulk ignore. That's not necessarily new functionality, but now that applies to credit card transactions as well. And you can see, by the way, that bank feed that I just did has already started feeding in transactions for that card that I synced. So it's pretty swift. So in the credit card reconciliation, as I mentioned, your credit card reconciliation is going to look a lot like your bank reconciliation now. So I've got an Intacct tab and I've got a bank tab for this account that's connected to feeds. So on the bank tab, I could see all my unmatched charges. And if I wanted to create a transaction from one of these charges, so say, I didn't have this on my books yet. There's nothing to match it to. So I can go over to this action button, hit create credit card transaction, and it's going to open up a window here, and it's pulling in some of the details so that I don't have to rekey things like the amount and the description. And I can put in all my information and save it. So I could say, in keeping with the celebration of the release of pumpkin spice, code it up, however million different dimensions I may need to code it to, and good to go. So I hit save. That transaction's off my list. It's been matched up. So that's a great way to find transactions that are missing. And if you happen to know the coding, then you can code it up or ask people about the coding, but at least you know what you haven't recorded yet. Now, the other thing I mentioned is in your list of credit card transactions, notice we have a delete button. So if I wanted to get rid of a transaction completely, this is permission-based, of course. You have to assign people the permissions to be able to do this. And as always, whenever a release comes out, make sure you check your permissions because new ones such as this always pop up. But if you have the right permissions, you can click the delete button, hit delete to get rid of it. Now you can also see the state of a transaction and sort and filter by it. This is new. This didn't used to be here. So if I just wanted to see paid transactions, I could easily filter for that on the fly and just see the 4 of them. I could just see things that were posted. Easy to filter, or I could sort it by state. So nice flexibility there to see what's going on with the different transactions that are in your system. And then finally, I mentioned enhancements in the charge payoff screen. So here when I'm creating a charge payoff so that I can move my credit card liability to AP and pay my credit card statement, I would hit add. I can pick my credit card. And notice I have these new fields, reference number and description. These fields are going to flow through to the transaction that's created by the charge payoff so that if you're going to look at what was this, I could put something in here like May credit card statement so that I know what that charge payoff was. So it's just a helpful contextual thing for you to work with and be able to more easily review your data. So that's the demo of the new credit card functionality. Moving on to our next section. So it's no secret to a lot of people, dynamic allocations is hands down my favorite module in Sage Intacct. I think that from the moment it came out, it was instantly a powerful value add, and we have a growing list of clients who have saved days worth of work per month because of this module. Well, in R3, we got a pretty significant improvement in dynamic allocations that's just going to make the module even more powerful and more valuable. And this is something we've been hoping for since it was released, and now it's here. So the functionality that we've been waiting for is cross-entity and multi-currency support. So dynamic allocations now has the ability to generate inter-entity transactions automatically. The inability to create these was, in my view, the biggest thing that they had to address, and they have now finally, not finally, it's a pretty young module, but they have now released this functionality in R3. They're able to do this because of all the changes in how inter-entity transactions get processed from the prior release. So this has hugely beneficial implications for companies that have multiple entities. What if you have an entity, for example, that bears the majority of your group's overhead costs, kind of like a headquarters, and you need to allocate those costs out to other entities in your group? You can use dynamic allocations. What if you have revenue that comes into one entity, and then pieces of that revenue need to be assigned out to other entities based on each entity's, proportionate share of labor costs? That's a common example. Use dynamic allocations. If you have shared benefit costs that are based on headcount per entity, you can use dynamic allocations. There's no limitation now that the allocation entries have to be within a single entity. So you probably get the idea. This opens the door for so many of your cross-entity allocations to be automated and turn into a one-click event. So you can choose on an allocation by allocation basis whether you want that allocation to go cross-entity. So for those allocations that are cross-entity, this gives you the benefit of centralizing your creation, management, and audit trail in one place. Again, the time savings here can be substantial. It was already saving clients days worth of time per month before we had easy cross-entity. Now there's easy cross-entity, so that has to contribute to even more savings. You can schedule recurring allocations so that these things just run automatically on whatever schedule you want. And finally, when transactions from a different currency are posted, they're going to be automatically converted to the destination entity's base currency. So this was a really good release for GL. On top of dynamic allocations, which we've already established is the best thing ever, we've got some additional great automation with journal entries. And for those of you playing in the multi-currency space, you now have the ability to automate creation of a revaluation entry. And for everyone, multi-currency or not, you have the ability to create a recurring journal entry from an existing entry. So 2020 Release 2 includes enhancements to automate and streamline the creation of journal entry. The revaluation automation enables you to automatically generate your unrealized gain and loss journal entry directly from your GL, AR, and AP revaluation reports. All you have to do is configure your unrealized gain and loss account and your journal in the GL setup page. You run your revaluation reports, whether live or offline, and you have an option to automatically create the appropriate journal entry. That journal entry is going to be created in a draft state so that you can review it before posting. I got to tell you, I really wish that I had this when I was a controller back on Intacct, working with 5 different entities, each one of them in a different base currency, and each one of them transacting in every currency I think I've ever seen in my life. So what we used to have to do was run this revaluation report and then go and book the journal entry ourselves. So this revaluation automation saves time, eliminates error-prone manual steps like I had to do, and you don't have to extract the information to enter the journal entries. It just does all of this for you. This is a huge time savings for people working in the multi-currency space. In addition to the revaluation automation, we've also now streamlined the setup of recurring journal entries. So you can now easily use any posted journal entry to set up a recurring journal entry. All you have to do is navigate to the posted entry and use the option in the More Options dropdown that says Recur. This is going to open up the recurring journal entry screen, pulling all the details from your posted entry, and from there you can make any tweaks or adjustments you might want and enter the recurring schedule information. This makes it a lot faster and easier to set up recurring journal entries. This is another one, as previous, you guys use it every day. If you find yourself doing the same entry over and over and over again, when you realize, hey, I'm doing the same entry over and over and over again, you now have the ability to easily just go to More Actions and click Recur, rather than having to go set it up and key in all of that detail. Imagine if this was like a 100-line journal entry. That's going to save a lot of time. And again, the goals here, right? It's increasing the accuracy and speed with which you're posting revaluation journal entry, automatically create and post the revaluation journal entries for the net gain and loss, and then increasing the speed with which you can do recurring entries. So let's take a look at some of these GL enhancements. I'm going to demo these now back to my Intacct environment. And I'm going to start this from a financial report. And I'll make it a little bit larger so those of you watching the WebEx can see it. The first functionality I want to demo is the capability of dynamic allocations to go cross-entity. What you're looking at here is a financial report with all my different entities across the top to get to a grand total of all my entities. And one thing that's unique about dynamic allocations is you have the ability to see before and after allocation impact. So I can see before I did any allocations, this was my number. The impact of my allocations was this. And here's the combined total. So you get full visibility into the impact of any given allocation, and you can have that on the face of your financials if you want to. So the example I have here is allocating my rent and occupancy costs across all of my different entities, and I wanted to allocate that based on the salaries in each entity. So you can see, I happen to do this with very easy numbers, so they both happen to be $100,000. So basically that means each entity should have the same salaries amount, same occupancy costs as they have salaries costs, because they have the same share. And you can see indeed, I've got my pre-allocation, and then I've got this allocated occupancy cost pulling out $95K from one entity and distributing it to the others so that everybody gets their appropriate share. Now, if I drill into the line, I can see that here's the entry that Dynamic Allocations automatically created for me. If I drill into that, I can see the full-blown, all the debits and credits, but I also see, and here's where the value add from Release 3 comes in, this automatic inter-entity entry. So it's recording all of these expenses that need to be borne by these different entities, and then it knows, hey, well, the general fund or general entity was on the hook for all this, so all these entities owe money back to the entity that paid it. So it's creating that automatic entry for you and balancing out your books. And of course, if I drill into the description line, I'm going to see the snapshot of how all of this was figured out. So I can see foolproof documentation of what my methodology was. I can see that I was focusing on location, which, as you know, location and entity are related in Sage Intacct. So I was focusing on location, and I wanted to allocate by location. I wanted to allocate my occupancy. I wanted to allocate it based on the relative balances in salary and wages. And I can see any one of these things and find out what Intacct determined that amount was. So if I click See Basis Calculation, it's going to show me, here's what I found for the salaries and wages balances by entity. And it's going to give me a report. And I just happen to have 20 or so add-ins in Excel, so it takes a while for my Excel to open. But here you can see, here's all the different locations. Here's the balances that they had in salaries. Easy to prove that the allocation is right. And then finally, if I go down to the bottom, I can see, here's how Intacct calculated the split that each entity should receive. I can look at this dynamic split, and I see the percentage that each entity got. So that was a great enhancement that a lot of people have been waiting for, and it opens up the usefulness of the module to even more companies than it was already useful for. Next thing I want to show, revaluation. So for those of you in multi-currency, you're probably familiar with running these AP open items, AR open items, revaluation reports, so you can get your unrealized gain or loss to book so that you can hopefully tie your AR aging to your general ledger. Well, now we've got automation in that process. So if you look at, I'm running this report, say I wanted to view it, I now have a button that I didn't have before that says Create JE. So this is going to create the journal entry for me offline, and it's going to put it in draft status so that I can review it and make sure that I'm happy with it. So if I go look at my revaluation journal, which I created to hold these transactions, I can see a draft status journal entry. And I can see that Intacct did the debits and credits for me. So it's crediting accounts payable, because in this case I had a loss, and it's debiting my unrealized gain or loss. Now, because it's in draft status, I can review this and make sure that I'm happy with it before I post it. Once I post it, say I need to reverse it the next month, it's very easy because of the functionality that Intacct has added over the past couple releases to just click it, say reverse, and then reverse it on whatever date you want. Normally that's going to be the first of the next month, but whatever you want, they're your books. Okay. And then I wanted to show you the capability to create a recurring journal entry from an existing entry. So here you see, this is a journal entry I booked before, and I was like, you know, I book this entry every single month when I need to do the bank rec because nobody ever records these transactions. I wish there was an easier way to do it. So you could take this journal entry, go to More Actions, click Recur, and that's going to take me to the recurring journal entry screen. So notice all of my details copied forward, so I'm not now rekeying in this transaction. So if I wanted to make any tweaks, I certainly could. but now I have the schedule tab and I can set up the scheduler just like I normally would on a recurring journal entry. So that saves a lot of time if you realize, hey, I should have made that entry recurring. And those are the GL enhancements. Next up, Salesforce integration for nonprofits. Now, I'll say this for the second time, just to be clear. This is in beta and it's early adopter. So you're not going to be able to see it if you're looking in your menu of subscriptions, but if you are interested in it, talk to us and we may be able to help you out. Intacct has a long-standing integration with Salesforce, and they are considered a Platinum Salesforce partner, which means that their integration is recognized as one of the best. Right now, Intacct is actively working on an integration specifically for nonprofits. And it plays very nicely with what Salesforce calls the Salesforce Nonprofit Success Pack. Among other things, one of the key developments in this functionality is going to be a journal entry sync from Salesforce to Intacct. So the idea behind this is much the same as the idea behind today's Salesforce integration. The goal is to give you real-time visibility between Salesforce and Intacct and to make reconciliation of your data seamless. For nonprofits, you're going to be leveraging the marriage of your CRM and financial data to get better insight into the progress of your programs, initiatives, and so forth. And this is going to result in time savings. Note, as I said, programs in early adopter phase right now. Intacct is working closely with a select group of partners, of which Dean Dorton is one, to develop and tailor this integration to what nonprofits want and need. So if you have interest in becoming an early adopter and you're a nonprofit, contact us so we can talk about what that might look like. This next one, I'm sure a lot of you were waiting for news on this ever since you saw what was going to be talked about in Release 3. 1099 NEC. I suppose that the IRS decided that 2020 was not hard enough for anyone in the United States, so they've chosen this year to reintroduce the Form 1099 NEC for you to report your non-employee compensation. That's right. Form 1099 Miscellaneous Box 7 is going away, and you're going to need to transition to Form 1099 NEC for that reporting. And this is effective for all effective for tax year 2020 onward, which means that by the time you file your 1099s this coming January, you already need this change in place. You're not going to be able to file Form 1099 Miscellaneous with Box 7 amounts for the year 2020. It just will not exist. The good news is, Intacct is ready for this 1099 NEC change, and we're ready early. So you will have to migrate your data from 1099 Miscellaneous Box 7 to Form 1099 NEC. We do not recommend that you wait until January 2021 to do this. You have the ability to do it now. We have Help Center documentation to share with you on this, and we even wrote up a guide that goes into a bit more detail about what your options are. And we're happy to help you also. If you log a support ticket with us for assistance, we're happy to help you with that. If you are interested in having the guide that we wrote up that walks through what your options are, just log a support ticket. We can get that guide out to you. But you do need to update your previous transactions to migrate them. Essentially, you have three options. You're going to be able to update your values on the vendor 1099 initial balances screen. You can utilize the transaction update import template, or you can select prompt to update all transactions when you change the vendor record. Or the last option, which I really don't recommend, but it is an option, is you could manually reclassify each transaction. Don't do that, but it is an option. Okay, more updates. So outside of the major enhancements we've talked about, there were a slew of additional updates that are worth mentioning. So here's the updates in AP and AR. In AP, if you apply a credit and pay bills, the amount to pay field is going to automatically update. So this saves you having to figure out what's left to pay and enter it in. Previously, you had to figure out what the amount left was to pay and key that in, and that could be a little bit painful of a process. That doesn't happen anymore. Also, if you have a payment request in for a bill, it used to be that you couldn't touch that bill or pay the rest of it until the payment request was fully processed. Well, now that's changed. So say you got a $1,000 bill, somebody puts in a payment request to pay $500. Now you can still put in another payment request to pay the other $500 if you needed to do that. That was an enhancement in R3. On the AR side, you now have the capability to prevent editing AR transactions after print. And this requirement actually came out of the increasing global expansion of Sage Intacct. So this was a hard requirement for companies in South Africa, and now everybody has the opportunity to use it. So we all benefit from the global expansion. You can flag invoices as printed. The waterfall payment logic is extended to all companies now. So previously, any of you who had smart rules or smart events related to AR were exempted from the waterfall payment logic in AR. Now everybody's got it. So if you're not familiar with what the waterfall logic is, we covered that a couple releases ago. There's great help documentation on that. Of course, you can reach out to us if you have any questions. And finally, there's a single object for AR payment. So for those of you writing custom reports or using that object in Smart Rules and Smart Event, just be aware there is now a single object for AR payment. There's been some enhancements to Sage Intacct, some add-on budgeting and planning solution. So we now have the ability to import lines to a budget model. We can layer in additional reporting books in our budget, and we can support up to 4 dimensions in a budget. That's for Intacct's budgeting and planning. They just call it SIBP or Sage Intacct Budgeting and Planning. Inventory's made some enhancements to bin tracking. So previously, the location of items in a warehouse was identified by aisles, rows, bins, or any combination of the 3. But there was no association between the 3. Now, bins by themselves pinpoint the specific location of items. Your users will know exactly where inventory is for putting away and picking, saving time and reducing errors. For example, say an item needs to be shipped. Well, a warehouse worker can find the bin where the item is kept by using the bin ID on the picking slip, which might identify the bin as being in, dry goods zone in aisle 4 on row 5. So bins are now unique across all warehouses. You associate each bin to a specific warehouse, and then you can assign the zone, aisle, row, and face attributes to each bin. These assignments let you create a coordinate system that describes the exact position of the bin within your warehouse. There's also streamlined warehouse transfers. So previously, when you transferred items between warehouses, a bin tracked item had to be transferred into the same bin. Now the bins are unique across all the warehouses, and each warehouse can have a different layout. So we changed warehouse transfer so that you specify the from and the to bin on your transfer. So for example, you might want to transfer 100 hammers from warehouse A to warehouse B. In warehouse A, the hammers are in bin 20, and when you transfer the hammers to warehouse B, you want them in bin 80. That kind of stuff is supported by this streamlined warehouse transfer. Contract lifecycle management. So previously, the biggie here is that previously, if you had MEA allocation errors, multiple element arrangement, so that's using advanced revenue recognition in Sage Intacct with contracts. So previously, if you needed to correct an MEA allocation error, it was kind of like playing a board game where you almost had to, make it to the end of it and then go back to start and want to tear your hair out. So when you needed to clear an MEA allocation, you had to clear all of them, going back to the beginning of time. To ease this frustration, Intacct has added the ability to clear just the last active MEA allocation. So now you can correct your errors without having to go all the way back to the start. Also worth noting, those of you who are using the contracts module previously could not easily use the AR configuration option that allows you to automatically apply inline credits in your invoices. Now you can use that. Intacct has fixed that in R3, and you're now able to go to your AR configuration screen and turn on the option to automatically apply inline credits. Enhancements in the interactive custom report writer. So you can now combine one or more reporting areas as needed so that you can report across workflows and business processes, which will give you more insight without relying on spreadsheets. And since reports are built from the detailed data, this combined reporting ability opens up the opportunity for larger scale in your reporting. They've also added the power to use account groups in interactive custom reports. So in ICRW, account groups are going to help you create repeatable account selections and easy roll-ups, simplify your ability to tie out your reports regardless of where they're built, gain more precise control on account ordering, and show section subtotals for each account groups. So you can use account groups in the ICRW across different reporting areas in the detail and summary level, including GL, AP, AR, and more. So the types of account groups that are supported are account groups that are made up of accounts, made up of categories, or group of account groups in the current release. Usability enhancements, these are some handy things. So one that I love is when you're working with a multi-entity environment. Previously, if you went to work in the entity level and then you closed your top level tab, you couldn't get back to the top level without signing in again. That was kind of annoying. So in this release, you now have the ability to get back up to the top level when you're working in the entity. You'll see in your drop-down bar, top level is going to be a selection option. Again, something I really wish that I had when I was a controller on Intacct. And for timeout, you now have a warning message that pops up when you're about to get timed out. We're referring to this as a friendlier timeout because it's not as much of a surprise when you get booted out of the system. And all other excitement. So for company, they now have a default country for addresses. Make sure you're using ISO codes to be able to do this. But what this does is it allows you that when you're creating a vendor, a customer, or whatever, the country in their address is going to default to whatever you set as the default country for your company. Now, by default, this default will be United States, but you can always go in and change that. The other thing they did is they've allowed you to specify a time offset for scheduled jobs. So say you've got these offline reports or other offline jobs that are scheduled to run daily or monthly or whatever, you can specify how many hours plus or minus they're going to run to help get some control over when that happens. For those of you with global consolidations, we now support the inclusion of entity-level GL accounts in consolidations. So if you've got accounts that you maybe created at the entity level for some kind of statutory reporting requirement or something entity-specific, your consolidation books can now pull in those GL accounts as well as the ones that were created at the top level. Now, just to note, this is available only to those companies that are using global consolidations with multiple base currencies. There is continued work in progress on a construction and real estate module. This is in the early adopter phase, so contact us if you're interested or might want to learn more about that module. In order entry, you can now import custom fields in a recurring transaction template. This was not possible previously. You can also track via the audit trail who turned a recurring transaction on and off. You now have more control over draft transactions, meaning if you print a draft transaction, the system is not going to flag it as already printed. That's more intuitive. You only really want it to flag as printed after you've posted it because you're probably printing a draft just to see how it might look. If you're using dropship or you're using buy to order and you're in a multi-currency world, you can actually have the dropship and buy to order transaction created in your vendor's currency, even if that currency is not the same as the currency of your sales order. Previously, the system was creating the transactions in the same currency as your sales transaction. So imagine you're a US vendor, or a US company rather. You create a sales order in US dollars, but you're going to have a vendor cost that's in maybe Canadian dollars. You want that follow-up purchasing transaction to be generated in Canadian dollars because that's how your vendor transacts. Now that's possible. Previously, it would have all been USD, and you'd have to go make that change. And in the purchasing module, if you're using additional postings on your transaction definitions, you can have those additional postings created in the transaction currency, which may not be the same as your entity's base currency. So if you've got, again, if you've got a purchasing transaction and you create that in Canadian dollars, you would probably want any additional postings to also happen in Canadian dollars.
whether you were a base currency of Canadian dollars or not. So just streamlining it, making it more logical. Again, this is just a ever obvious proof of Sage Intacct's continued global expansion and really honing in on what people need when they're working in a multi-currency global kind of environment. And for you developer types out there, Platform Services has seen a couple enhancements. So there's been enhancements help making installing an application faster. There's also trigger enhancements that are going to allow you to view all triggers in one central page and streamline the creation of your XML document templates. And now I'm going to demo a few of the things from all those selected other enhancements that we just went over. Okay, so one of the biggies, let's take a look at editing a vendor for these 1099 NEC changes. So one of the methods you have available to you to make these changes is editing the vendor record. Notice if I edit a vendor, come over to additional information, and I click the Form 1099 hyperlink. Right now, 1099 miscellaneous box 7 is still there. I don't want to say it's useless, but it kind of is useless because by the time that you have to file your 1099s in January 2021, this is not going to be there and you can't use this to file. So what you can do is you can edit your vendors, and notice we now have support for Form NEC. So you can come to a vendor profile, choose this Form NEC, choose the appropriate box. I would imagine that's probably box 1 as a default, and you can save your vendor record. Now I've updated it so that it's using the correct Form 1099. So that's one approach. There's also the import approach. Again, we're happy to provide you with a little bit more detailed guide that we've written up about your different options and how to do them. And we're also happy to help you if you log a support ticket to help get you through that. It's a one-time thing. Hopefully the IRS doesn't plan on changing this form yet again anytime soon, but we have to make that update. Next, I wanted to show you the ability to navigate from the entity level to the top level. So notice here I am at the top level. Imagine if I was in the top level and I hit X. Previously, this would result in me yelling at someone because I needed to take out my anger, and I noticed that I couldn't get back to the top level. Well, now we've got General, which is my current entity, and see, I have top level available. So all you have to do is pop back up to that top level, and I'm back to the top. And there's no stress and no re-signing in, and nobody's going to have to like feel bad about themselves because I took out my anger on them. It's just happier for everyone. Next up on the company setup screen, if I edit my company settings here, notice if I scroll down a bit in my global settings, I have a default country for addresses. So that's fine. It defaults to the United States. I happen to be sitting here in Connecticut in the United States, so that's what I want. But if I was a UK company, this could default to the United Kingdom just as easily. And then any vendor that I created from here on out, when I go to create that vendor, it's going to default their country address as United Kingdom. So just a helpful, definitely helpful little usability thing that's going to make creation faster. Along similar lines, scheduled jobs execution offset is a new thing as well. So I can go in here and I could say, for my scheduled jobs, run it an hour later than you normally would have. You can do all these different options. It goes all the way up to 23 hours, or you could leave it at none. In accounts receivable, remember I said we've got some ability to control whether transactions can get printed or not after they've been, can get edited or not after they've been printed. So if I scroll down here to the enable functionality section, you can see I now have these options here. Disable editing after posted transactions are printed or emailed. I could also have an option to flag something as printed when any print or email option is selected. So
Again, we benefited from some of this globalization where other countries needed this, and now we have the option, if we choose to turn those settings on. This is another thing. In addition to checking your permissions whenever a new release comes out, it's also a good idea to just take a look through your configuration screens and see if any cool new options like this have popped up, because you'd be surprised sometimes after a release, you have new options that you can take advantage of. And then finally, the last piece I'm going to show is in a multi-currency world, if I wanted to create my additional postings in a transaction currency, I now have an enable functionality button for that. So if I'm doing additional postings on my transaction definitions and purchasing, I can select that box to make that happen for me. Again, nice benefit, kind of the globalization of Intacct. All right, so that wraps up my demos. This slide that you're all going to get is just a few links on some good places to learn more. So there is a link to the full release notes. Intacct always publishes very good, comprehensive, in-depth release notes, and they also have some short videos highlighting each of the releases and showing a little bit about what the impact was. There's some updated help topics that have rolled out with this release. So I've given you a link to where you can find those. For those of you developer types out there, there are notes on anything that changed on kind of the more developer front in the developer blog. And of course, you guys are always welcome to contact us using this ERP support at DDAF Tech, and we will log a ticket and someone will be back to you to help you out. So now I have time for questions, and I'll leave up the contact info as well while we're going through the questions.
Okay, awesome. Thank you, Jim. Yeah, if you guys have any questions, feel free to type them into that chat or Q&A. Jim, I did get one earlier about the early adopter thing. So can you just explain what the process looks like for that a little bit, like what all that entails?
Yeah, so if you're looking to become an early adopter of the Salesforce integration, I suppose we're talking about the nonprofit success pack, is that right?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so if you're looking to become an early adopter, contact us. You can log a case with this ERP support email, and we can talk about that. It's a process that we have to walk through with you guys in Intacct, but if you're interested, we may be able to get you into the early adopter group.
Okay,
or even just
awesome.
learn more about it, but we're happy to talk further about it.
Okay. And then I had one, it says, regarding the AR payment object, what was added to this object?
It wasn't so much added as previously there were two objects. It's been combined into one. So if you're going to see an object, and I'll actually pull up the specific release note to show you. So if I go over to my accounts receivable here, you can see basically there's a single object for AR payment. So you used to have one called AR payment and then one called AR PYMT. Well, now there's one object called AR payment. It's the only one you're going to see. If you have existing smart events, smart rules, Intacct does note that they will still work, but it is worth noting that this is now one object. So basically two objects have been merged into one.
Okay, thank you. That was helpful. And then someone asked, we don't have the top level drop down from the entity. Is that something you have to activate?
I don't think so. It just worked for me as soon as I signed into my demo environment. So we may have to take a look at that with you, because as far as I've seen, it's been working. For example, this is me in an entity, and I have top level here. Make sure that you're not looking at just recently used. It could be if you have all entities. But if that's not the case, we'll have to take a look at that. It could also be if people have restrictions to just seeing a certain entity that they wouldn't see the top level, but we could look at that together if those don't solve the problem.
Okay. That sounds good. I haven't seen anything else come through, Jim. But again, like Jim said, we'll be sending this out probably by tomorrow morning, the latest, just so the recording can load. But if you guys find any questions in the meantime that pop in your head, email us and we will be happy to help. So, Jim, thank you for this. We appreciate it, and I hope everyone else has a good rest of their day.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.